So the name of my tutorial is called Group Work. And I I hope that there are some useful hacks in here for all of you. So the real focus of this is not technical, but about collaboration, which is really beautiful, but also, I'm sure, as we all know by this point in our careers, pretty difficult. And specifically sociologically, within a collaborative dynamic, some of us are pointy and some of us are round. As you can tell, these are highly technical terms. So what I mean by this is that it can be easy for us to needle each other and make each other feel bad or lesser, even if we don't realize we're doing it. And to illustrate this, I want to just tell you a little personal story about my own experience. Because something that surprised me is how highly context dependent this dynamic can be. Even if we think that we tend to be a sharp, pointy person within a group or a soft, round person, it can really change based on your context. So my context that I come to all of this is through an electrical engineering and computer science background. So I've done a lot of things in my career before I started doing Hackweek stuff. I helped design a programming language that is used in data centers around the world. I helped write software in the operating system kernels for all of the Apple devices that you use on a daily basis. And I helped write firmware for laser radar devices mapping San Francisco. And so I had done all of this before I went to the data science hackathon in the December of 2018, where I promptly found that I felt like a useless piece of crap and took this selfie right before I ran to the bathroom and cried in one of the stalls and then had to wipe all of my makeup off. And it was a bad day. I hadn't worked with data before in this respect, and I was surprised at how much even a willingness to learn didn't really help me with this feeling of imposter syndrome and this feeling that my teammates hated me a lot. In this context, was that soft, round shape rather than what I find normally, which is that I'm the sharp, pointy shape that has to figure out how to not make other people feel bad. This gave me an appreciation for what it can be like being on both sides of that coin. And it also gave me an appreciation for how not far away those two ways of being are. I think, if anything, it helped me realize that besides, some of us being sharp and some of us being soft, it made me realize that regardless, we're all trying to be good teammates. We're trying to be good neighbors. But doing so is really hard. And like any skill, it takes a lot of practice. So rather than hoping that we all have had enough practice to be great teammates this week, I am going to do the classic Hack Week thing of sharing with you some hacks to use for when you're feeling particularly sharp and pointy in your group, or whether you're feeling round and soft and vulnerable. So here's my first hack. My first hack is for those of us feeling sharp and pointy, and it's a simple one. It's to use collective pronouns like we instead of directive pronouns like you. And so the point of this is really to promote a sense of shared purpose and teamwork, even if you're really telling someone to do something that they are personally responsible for. So an example of this is, rather than telling someone, oh, your program doesn't work because you need to install IcePix using pip, you could just swap that pronoun out and say, we need to install IcePix with pip. Obviously, this is still happening on their computer. It's still your teammates' responsibility to get their dependencies set up. But by doing this, you are making it a journey that you are both taking on. You are helping your teammate who didn't know about this dependency problem learn how to overcome this obstacle. And now, rather than having this thing be a setback that makes them feel more distant from you, they might be more likely to come to you for help, or more likely to share the things that they're working on with you so that you can give your advice. Another example, maybe a little bit less pointed, is instead of saying, can you open a new tab and search for the documentation, you could say, let's open a new tab and search for the documentation. I find that my mind just sort of goes towards let's quite a lot. I don't know, it feels kind of dynamic and active to me. In office hours, I use this one all the time. But I encourage you to set a little interrupt in your brain when you are forming the next sentence you're about to say, and seeing if you can collectivize any of the things you're about to speak when you're working with your teammates. It can become sort of a fun process. I think that it not only makes your teammates feel good, but it can help you feel good too, especially if you're unhappy with the progress that you're making so far. It makes it feel a lot more like a backpacking trip that you're all trying to survive with each other, rather than a sprint that you are relying on your team for. So my second hack for those of you who are feeling sharp and pointy is to share softly. And this one is a little bit less algorithmic in its implementation. But what I mean by sharing softly is that when we work together, we have to ask each other a lot of questions, and we have a lot of opportunity to offer suggestions. And the art that we're really practicing here, the hack that I'm going to suggest, is that we find a way to ask questions and offer suggestions without making the conversation with our teammates feel like we're putting that person through a PhD qualifying exam. And so here are some concrete ways that you can try and see if they work out well for you to soften the things that you are sharing with the people you're working with. I think that it can often really help to shift the subject of questions off of the individual and onto the concept that you're tackling together. And we'll go over some examples of this in a second. It can also really, really help to avoid absolutes and judgments of triviality. Never speak in absolutes. They are just simply the stupidest thing you could do. It can be really helpful to instead suggest the thing that you care about and the thing that you feel very strongly about, and use words that get close to the absolute version of your point, but leave some for the imagination of the reader. This is one of my favorite things about J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm a big Tolkien nerd, and he really loves, there's some literary term for this, but if he was gonna say that like a character is really pissed off about another character, the way he does it is by saying character A had no great love for character B. I could just feel the ice coming from that phrase. I think it's wonderful. Avoiding absolutes can be a really powerful way to underscore your point. And lastly, I think that it can be very helpful here to focus on subjective experience rather than objective fact. As scientists and engineers, we're used to thinking about things in terms of what we know and what we have experimentally verified. But when it comes to the implementation of scientific processes, when it comes to writing code, a lot of things can actually really just be up to your own prior experience. And rather than stating things like they are facts, stating things like they are your experience can be very helpful in making people feel less imposed upon. So here are some examples of all of this stuff. Rather than asking someone if it's unclear if they're familiar with Python, rather than asking them, do you know what Python is? You can try asking, what does Python mean to you? Or how familiar are you with Python? Now we're making room, we're making this gray area where someone can explain that they have used Python before, but they're really rather unfamiliar with a lot of its constructs. And you can imagine swapping Python out for any sort of technology here. Have you used remote sensing data before? How familiar are you with it? Here's one where we're talking about triviality. If you're opening a CSV file from your hard drive, you could say, oh, this is easy. It's just a matter of reading a CSV file. But if the person that you're working with doesn't know how to do that, then they might feel like they missed a beat, that they really should know how to do that before they're working with you. So instead, you can excitedly say, oh, we're reading a CSV file? There are a lot of resources to help us with that. Or reading a CSV file is a problem I've worked on before. I know we can tackle that. You're inviting this person into the sphere of agency that you have. you're providing these gray areas where this person is going to be able to learn and achieve things on their own while working with you. Does that make sense is a very common one, especially when you're teaching someone something. And this is a question that has 9 billion different ways to swap it out for something better. I have attended whole lectures about ways to get around asking, does that make sense? But to the point of our hacks, we are avoiding absolutes, and we are just sort of trying to assess someone's place in the material without directly asking, have you gotten to where I need you to be? So we can ask, how do you feel about what we just went over? Or did I explain that well? We're shifting the focus onto us. Did we get across the things that we want to get across? Because if we didn't, that's sort of our problem. We have to repeat ourselves in a way that is more understandable. And this is one that folks who have been working with programming languages a lot might do quite a bit. They might have technologies that are on their love list or their hit list. And so if you are telling someone, you really should be using NumPy instead of what you're doing, or if you hate NumPy and you see that they're using NumPy and you just say offhand, ugh, NumPy is total trash. This is the kind of place where it can be really fun to express these opinions, but these are the kinds of things that you share in water cooler conversation with your friends, not necessarily when you're working with team members. And so good ways to replace these sentences with the same kind of sentiment, but in a little softer way, is to really explain what's going on here. And by taking the emphasis off of the person who's using NumPy and more onto the library itself. I've had a lot of good experiences with NumPy in the past. Or if you think NumPy is trash, then you could say, I'm worried about NumPy because I've seen it perform poorly with this kind of data. Maybe you've seen it perform poorly with all data, but it doesn't really matter. The point is you're giving a reasoning and you're giving something that's not just an absolute judgment call here for the person to learn from. And so this is, I think, the real heart of the art of being a technically adept team member who has the tendency to be sharp and pointy, and figuring out how to soften some of those points. So I invite you to really put some thought into the way that you use language to communicate these true things that you want to get across when you're working with someone. This is the kind of thing that can really pay dividends by practicing. Okay, checking the time. Cool. So the next 2 hacks that I have are for when we're feeling soft and round. And the first, and I think most important one, is to really celebrate our own personal goals. And when I talk about goals, for the week, we have our own goals for, we want to write software and do science that works with ICESat-2 data and advance the general state of knowledge about all of these different geological features that we're studying. But for this week, we might pick something a little bit less grand for ourselves. So we all come to a hack week with very different contexts, and success is going to look different for each of us. So I think that even though we have different contexts and therefore we should really aim to have different goals, the real thing that's unifying us all is that we're moving at the same pace. We're struggling very hard to learn a lot and do a lot all within 1 week of time with a bunch of people that we might not have even known before. So I think that it's really useful to start your week of group work off by assessing where you're starting from and where you would like to end up after 5 days of hard work. So when we're choosing goals, it can be really, really useful to choose our goals based on where we're starting from. If we've never worked with remote sensing data before, or if we've never even really worked with Python before, maybe our goals can be much more effectively achieved if we set something that's just outside of our comfort zone, but maybe not too far afield. Rather than integrating whole new data sources that we've never worked with before, we can start by just choosing a goal that maybe focuses on downloading one set of data that has good tutorial coverage and mapping it. And to that point, I think that choosing goals that give us lots of small wins along the way can really help with feelings of going at a slower pace or feelings of imposter syndrome. If you consciously think of downloading the data as a goal and then mapping the data as another goal, then you're constantly moving forward in a way that you can check boxes off your to-do list and look at the things that you've achieved, rather than just focusing on how far you have yet to go. And when we're choosing goals, I think also for those of us who are very technically experienced and might find ourselves being more sharp and pointy this week, can be really helpful to choose goals that are within our own agency to achieve. If we want to do a whole lot of work, but most of that work is going to involve our teammates, then we're really placing our own goals within the agency of our teammates. And if our teammates have much shorter term goals and are not going to be moving at our pace, then we're setting ourselves up for a lot of strife by wishing everyone was moving faster, rather than picking goals for ourselves that can benefit from teamwork, but also are largely about the time we're putting into our work. Maybe learning more about a given data product that we hadn't seen before, or maybe figuring out how to code more effectively and more defensively for the application we're working on in our project. I think that putting a lot of thought into our goals can really help us out here. But the hack here is not to choose goals effectively. The hack is to celebrate them whatever they are. And to illustrate this point, I'm going to show you this horrible video game called QOP, where you play a track runner and you control the track runner's individual leg muscles with these different keys on the keyboard. It's incredibly difficult to play this game. And so this video shows a masterful player who set a goal for themselves to run more than 6 meters. In real life, a track runner would not set a goal to run 6 meters. This would be something utterly trivial. But because we're playing this game in this different context, we're setting goals that are actually achievable rather than doing a 100-meter dash. We're doing a 6-meter dash. And therefore, we can have fun along the way. If your goal was to have 100 meters down pat, then you would absolutely hate this game. But no one plays this game in order to do an actual race length of running. People play this game to see how far they can get. And so I think that that's worthy of celebration. I think that that's worthy of acknowledging the way that you are having fun is not to run a marathon, but to try this experience out and see how far it gets you. And this is, by the way, someone who's masterfully good at this game. Just to give you a sense of what it looks like when normal people play this game. I'll give it a second to load. It's unseemly hard. So like, I'm trying my hardest right now, and I ran a total of 0.2 meters. And so given my skill level at this game, maybe the goal that I should choose isn't even to run 6 meters. Maybe my goal should just be to run a non-negative number of distance. Maybe that's my first goal, and that's my small win. And my ultimate goal for the week is going to be to run 1 meter. And if I can get that far, then I'll consider that amazing. Oh man, okay. Well, I'm good at running backwards. And so keeping this image in your head, I'm really inviting you to enjoy the process and celebrate the small goals that you are working to achieve, because those are fun, those are great, those are why you're here. You're not here to do a complete PhD thesis, you're here to try something out. And while we're at it, I think we're also here to celebrate our teammates' goals. In hip hop music, there's this concept of a hype man, which is a member of a rap collective whose main purpose is to just hype everyone up and get everyone excited and exclaim how awesome their teammates are. Pictured here is maybe the most famous hype man of all time, Flava Flav, and he just exemplifies being a good teammate and having a good time because he's so happy to be working with everyone that's amazing in the group Public Enemy. And even if you think that you are celebrating your teammates' goals too often, I think that it's really not. When we're learning something new, we're really hard on ourselves, and we can use a lot more validation than seems like necessary in normal social interaction. So take a moment to observe what your teammates' goals are. Maybe talk amongst your group about what your individual goals are going to be for this week. And after you know those goals, see if you can go about encouraging people as they move towards them and celebrating the ways that they're going about using their time this week. Because we're all here to make sure that we have, a good and educational, exciting time. And to that point, my last hack for those of us who are round and soft, but also those of us who are sharp and pointy, is to remember that experience is subjective. And by this, I don't mean the usual like, whoa, man, is the red that I see the same color red as the color red you see? I mean by this that our teammates' experience of working with us this week is really largely unrelated to our perception of what their experience is working with us. If we think our teammates are wishing we were moving faster or knew more, or if we're afraid that our teammates feel injured and hurt and are scared of everything, these are really just our perceptions of what's going on. And they bear some correlation to how reality works, but really not a linear, understandable correlation. And nothing beats good communication and actual understanding of where each other is at. So if we're having a bad time, we can rest assured that that bad time is not being interpreted in the same way with all of our other teammates. It's okay to struggle, and it's okay to feel bad in this kind of context because we're really vulnerable and we're learning a whole lot of new stuff, and that's amazing. But the thing that was going to get us through all of this is knowing that your teammates really want you to succeed and are really working their hardest to figure out how to be your best hype man. They're really there to, work with you, not against you. And so even if it seems like, even if we feel like we're not doing enough or we're not the right kind of teammate, this is not objective reality. This is a subjective experience. And just remembering that for a second, I find helps me a whole lot. So, to recap, if we're feeling pointy, try using collective pronouns instead of singular ones. Try practicing sharing softly. Take the emphasis off of the person and put it on the technical concept. Avoid absolutes and judgments of triviality. If we're feeling soft and round and vulnerable, celebrate our own personal goals. Celebrate the small wins that we've had along the way. And celebrate our teammates' goals as well. Figure out how to make this a collective celebration. And remember, experience is subjective. What we're doing this week is really, really hard, and we are all rooting for each other. So when we're feeling bad, know that regardless of whether we can see it and regardless of whether we can feel it, there are people out there rooting for us. I'm certainly rooting for you. And I think that this is going to be a really fun week. So I'm really looking forward to what you all are going to do in your projects this week and how much you are all learning already